We are all one great heart beating. We are all one big love breathing. We are all one holy being. We are everything. We are everything. We are all this body, great heart body. We are all this every big love's breathing. We are all this body, holy body. We are everything. We are everything. It's never ending. We are all this body, great heart body. We are all this every big love's body. We are all this body, holy body. We are everything. We are everything. It's never ending. We are all this body, great heart body. We are all this every big love's body. We are all this body, holy body. We are everything. We are everything. It's never ending. We are all this body, great heart body. We are all this every big love's body. We are all this body, holy body. We are everything. We are everything. It's never ending. We are all this body, great heart body. We are all this every big love's body. We are all this body, holy body. We are everything. We are everything. It's never ending. We are all this body, great heart body. We are all this every big love's breathing. We are all this body, holy body. We are everything. We are everything.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I see that people are still joining, so we welcome you as you join with us. My name is Kyle Iboshi. I'm an investigative reporter with KGW Channel 8, and it really is my honor and privilege to be your MC for this evening's event. 75 years later is now Hiroshima and Nagasaki, an Ending the Nuclear Threat online memorial event. A memorial to the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and others around the world impacted by nuclear weapons development, testing, and use. As noted in the title, and is clear by us all visiting here on Zoom, this is an online event due to the coronavirus pandemic. And while we can't be with one another in person, it certainly is wonderful we can share this time together virtually. I think about the global community and how we've come together during this pandemic, how we're constantly reminded that we need one another, we need to cooperate during this time, and we need peace. I also think about how right now we're experiencing really a historic moment and how important it is that we recognize the lessons from the past and share those experiences with future generations, much like the tragedies that unfolded 75 years ago. So at this time, I'd like to begin our program by introducing Cathy Sampson-Kruse. She's an environmental activist and enrolled member of the Walla Walla Tribe. Cathy has been involved with Oregon PSR's Healthy Climate and anti-nuclear work since 2014. So please join me in welcoming Cathy.
Good day. My name is Cathy Sampson-Kruse. My Wallula name is Wayausuks. I am a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, the Walla Walla, and the Cayuse. Our homelands rest from the Blue Mountains of northeastern Oregon to the Walla Walla and Wallowa Valleys, to the White Bluffs and Columbia Point near what is now called the Hanford Reserve. My parents are Otway Carl Sampson, known as Pio Pio Mox Mox, and my mother, Marion Arlita Sampson, from the Heppner-Hardman area. I wish to read the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility Land Acknowledgement Statement. As an organization of healthcare professionals and public health advocates, we have an ethical commitment to do no harm. From that lens, and as guests living on these lands and waters, Oregon PSR acknowledges the original stewards and protectors of what we now refer to as the Pacific Northwest. For thousands of years, the indigenous people of this area, including but not limited to the Multnomah, the Owasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla, lived in right relationship with the land, air, and water. Through millennia, they accumulated knowledge and established life ways that sustained the people, plants, and animals, and did not contribute to the current environmental crisis that we now face. Today, Oregon is home to 9 federally recognized tribes, as well as many indigenous communities and tribes that are not federally recognized. Portland is home to an impressive urban indigenous community representing more than 380 tribes. We recognize and respect these indigenous communities. We honor and acknowledge the resilience of this land and of the people and culture whose stewardship predates colonialization. As an organization and as individuals, we strive to learn from and support indigenous communities in their efforts to protect the health of our planet. We recognize the myriad of ways that colonialization has been harmful to indigenous people and harmful to the land, and acknowledge the need for reparations and healing. In closing, we will always protect the sacred. Kwalisam Chana, we are still here. Ai Katsiaya Pusha. Ai Katsiaya Kathla. Ai.
Cathy, thank you for those words. Our first speaker is Tricia Pritikin. She's a Hanford Downwinder and internationally recognized advocate on behalf of populations exposed to Hanford's off-site radiation releases. Tricia was born in Richland, Washington, and she remains concerned for the welfare of populations exposed to nuclear fallout in the US and globally. She served on both regional and federal advisory boards and has given presentations in the United States and internationally on topics related to the health outcomes of radioactive fallout exposure. Tricia.
My name is Tricia Pritikin, and I was born and raised next to a place called Hanford, which was a Manhattan Project and Cold War nuclear weapons production site located in eastern Washington state within the Pacific Northwest of the United States. I'm here today because for the 75th commemoration of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while we pause to honor the many, many Japanese individuals and others who were in Japan at the time, who died or who suffered from radiation sickness after the bombings. We must also stop to consider the many, many civilians within the United States who live downwind of nuclear weapons production sites like Hanford. Many people have not heard of Hanford, other than perhaps a few news stories about our leaky tanks. We have 77 leaking tanks full of high-level radioactive waste at Hanford. We have collapsing tunnels within which trains filled with radioactive animals that were experimented upon and other waste. The tunnels have collapsed. So that's what people have mostly heard about. But people like me, born and raised near Hanford, now suffer from a range of radiogenic disease and cancers, which are identical to what is seen in people downwind of the Nevada test site, where atomic tests, above ground tests were conducted during the Cold War beginning in 1951, and also seen in people in the Marshall Islands, where the United States tested, that's in the Pacific Ocean, tested huge hydrogen bombs and other bombs in the 50s. Now, the reason it's important to stop and consider what happened to civilians, particularly children who are very vulnerable to radiation, during both the Manhattan Project and the Cold War. And I must say also those downwind of the Trinity test site, where the very first atomic bomb was tested in 1945. Civilians are now suffering, if they haven't already died, from a range of cancers and other diseases. The reason it's important, as I was going to say, to consider this is that the Trump administration has been making noise about the possibility of resuming testing. We can't let that happen. For anytime there's nuclear testing, there are people downwind of those tests who would be exposed to radioactive fallout. There are production sites that produce the bombs that are tested. People downwind of those sites will also be exposed to radioactive fallout from the production. Now, Hanford produced plutonium, and it was actually the primary site of plutonium production for the Manhattan Project, and then for the Cold War nuclear arms buildup. It was a really messy process in which there were a total of 9 production reactors along the Columbia River, in which fuel rods were irradiated, then shoved out the backs of the reactors, transported by trains to chemical separations, and then through a very messy process, which released a lot of radiation into the air and into the Columbia River, a tiny, tiny amount of plutonium was extracted. The plutonium that was produced at Hanford was used for the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, and also in the Trinity test that I just mentioned. Now, when, as Hanford continued production, it kept reassuring people living around the facility that it was a safe place to live and that Hanford posed no harm. But then in the early 1980s, people started reporting cancers and other diseases in the farms across from the reactors on the Columbia River. And an investigative reporter from Spokane Spokesman Review named Karen Dorn Steele began to report on those cancers and other illnesses. As concern grew over the safety of Hanford, pressure began to be put on the Department of Energy, and a group was formed in Spokane called HEAL, the Hanford Education Action League. And that group brought in speakers to talk about the dangers of radionuclides. A reverend named William Huff, who was the reverend of the Unitarian Church in Spokane, wrote a sermon called The Silent Holocaust, which educated people on the dangers of radionuclides. And finally, in response to both FOIAs, that's Freedom of Information Act requests, and public pressure, the Department of Energy in 1986, which is 40 years after Hanford began to secretly release radiation to the air and water, they finally declassified early Hanford operating documents that revealed that Hanford had released throughout the Pacific Northwest, through eastern Washington, Idaho, western Montana, into northern Oregon, and into the Columbia River directly, which impacted communities both in Oregon and Washington that were downriver, had released thousands and hundreds of thousands of curies of a range of radionuclides. Just for comparison's sake, 3 Mile Island released 19 to 21 curies of I-131 in 1979 when they had a partial meltdown. Hanford released over 750,000 curies of radioiodine. I'm not saying that 3 Mile Island was not a serious event. I think there were a lot of people who were injured from their exposures downwind of 3 Mile Island. But in order to put it in perspective, Hanford released chronic amounts, chronically, of airborne radiation and waterborne radiation over 40 years and did not disclose this to us until 1986. At that time, over 5,000 people filed lawsuits, personal injury lawsuits against the former contractors that ran Hanford. And the action was filed as a public utility action under the Price-Anderson Act. We have a new book out. I say we because it's a collaborative effort. It's called The Hanford Plaintiffs, and it has a foreword by Karen Dorn Steele, and it has the story of 24 former Hanford plaintiffs. The reason I wrote this book was to document our stories before they vanish from the public conscience. I feel that now that after 24 years, the litigation finally settled, only 3 people out of 5,000 had had a chance to tell their stories before a jury of their peers. And because of the length of the litigation, the public interest in the Hanford story waned, and people began to think about other things, and our stories just weren't in the news any longer. And now that the cases have settled for very meager settlements, I'm talking several $1,000s for a cancer or a cancer death, very, very meager settlements. I was afraid that the stories would go away if we didn't collect them and publish them. And with the help of 2 law firms for plaintiffs' counsel, that's Tom Folds in Seattle and Richard Iman in Spokane, I was able to contact or send out a letter to former plaintiffs asking who would like to participate, and I ended up with 24 people. These stories, many of these people have not shared their stories before. And if you read these stories, it provides very solid evidence for why no further testing of nuclear weapons should be done, and why nuclear weapons cannot be a part of our world in the future. The suffering that occurs following exposures is horrendous. I can say this from personal experience. I myself lost my father to thyroid cancer, which was caused by his on-the-job exposure. He was a nuclear engineer at Hanford. My mother died of very aggressive malignant melanoma. When the hurdle cells were found in my thyroid, which are indicative of a form of thyroid cancer, my entire thyroid was removed, and I now have hypoparathyroidism, which means I lost 3 of 4 parathyroids, and it's a very perilous disease in which your calcium plunges, and you get tetany and seizures, and your kidney function is impaired to the point of kidney failure. So it's very complicated. And many of the people I grew up with now have a range of endocrine cancers, and they have thyroid cancers, autoimmune diseases, infertility, miscarriages, and these are the same diseases you see with the Nevada test site downwinders, the Trinity test site downwinders, Marshall Islanders, all the same diseases. And our government has never been held accountable for these injuries. And we had a medical monitoring program that was approved by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry due to our high exposures, and the Department of Energy refused to fund that. So we've received no help. We've received very little in the way of compensation through the settlements, but many of the 5,000 plaintiffs received nothing. And sort of the last thing I'd like to do after before I finish here is to read just a real quick excerpt from this book from the Hanford Plaintiffs, because I think it exemplifies the spirit of this project and all of us, what we wanted to accomplish with this project. And by the way, the proceeds from this book the net proceeds of this book go to the work of CORE, which is the Consequences of Radiation Exposure, which is found at corehanford.org. We are an organization, a nonprofit dedicated to increasing public awareness of the civilians in the United States and the Marshall Islands who have been injured as a result of nuclear weapons production and testing. This is from Chapter 1, The Forgotten Guinea Pigs. An expectant mother drinks multiple glasses of milk every day throughout her pregnancy, faithfully following the latest government-issued nutritional guidelines for a healthy baby. Unbeknownst to her, the milk she drinks is saturated with a radioactive isotope of iodine known as I-131. The radioactive iodine easily crosses the placental barrier, gravely damaging the thyroid gland of her fetus. The year is 1950. The fetus is me. Throughout the U.S. Pacific Northwest, beginning in late December 1944, and for several decades thereafter, thousands of Americans like my mother and me were chronically exposed to destructive levels of ionizing radiation. We have reaped the devastating health consequences throughout our often abbreviated lives. In this book, I endeavor to give voice to a group of Americans whose stories are largely unknown. These are the stories of innocent civilians poisoned by widespread radioactive fallout, the byproduct of plutonium production at the Hanford Nuclear Weapons Complex, a federal facility that operated on the Columbia River in southeastern Washington state without public scrutiny, exempt from most federal, state, and local regulations for more than 40 years. It's interesting how in the middle of the COVID pandemic, we again see the federal government unable to care for the welfare of its own citizens. It feels like a repeat to people like me.
Tricia, thank you so much for that very personal insight and the work that you've done as well. We're now honored to hear from Harvey Thorstad. Harvey's a retired commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve and a Vietnam veteran, having served as an advisor in Vietnam for 1 year. He's the past president of Veterans for Peace Chapter 72 in Portland and a member of the National Association of Atomic and Nuclear Veterans. Please join me in welcoming Harvey.
Okay. 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 Hello, I am Harvey Thorstad, Commander, U.S. Naval Reserve, retired. I represent two organizations, the National Association of Atomic Veterans and Veterans for Peace. I served aboard the light cruiser, the USS Oklahoma City, CLG-5, where I was exposed to asbestos and very loud engine noise without adequate ear protection, which has damaged my ears. I served as advisor for 1 year in Vietnam, where I was exposed to Agent Orange. I served aboard the ocean-going tug USS Muncie ATF 107, where I personally witnessed 33 nuclear airbursts from a distance of about 22 miles. This qualifies me as an atomic veteran and member of the National Association of Atomic Veterans. I served as president of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 72 in Portland, or the Portland, Oregon chapter. Nuclear accidents happen. Let me say that again. nuclear accidents happen. I was within 24 seconds of being at ground zero for an atomic bomb airburst. The story is sort of like as follows. I was salvage and diving officer while setting up a deep water moor 2.5 miles deep off Christmas Island. Christmas Island is about 200 miles south of Hawaii. This moor was used to moor targets that would serve for the Air Force coming over very high to drop atomic bomb airbursts. As the support ship, part of our job was to tow targets containing electronic targeting gear out and moor it to the buoy, get out of the way, and anchor about 22 miles away and listen to the countdown as the Air Force came over and dropped their bombs. One night, we had trouble locating the moor. And so we were running late before we had hooked up the float with the targeting equipment to the moor. And we were just heading out as fast as our ship could go, still nighttime, getting out of the blast area. We're fairly well out, and we're listening in the pilot house, still dark, to the countdown as the Air Force plane comes over. Target acquired, countdown, 33 seconds to drop, 31, 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24. And we hear over the speakers, hold count. I repeat, this is Navy Christmas. Hold count, over. This is Air Force 76. What's the problem? Over. This is Navy Christmas. We calculate that you are targeting the assist ship. Over. The Air Force came within 24 seconds of destroying our ship with 76 personnel aboard, including me, by the way, with a nuclear airburst. Nuclear accidents happen. Well, at Christmas Island, each person had dosimeters, film badges, and dark goggles. Upon completion of the mission, the film badges and dosimeters were checked, and everyone was assured that we were within safe limits. We now know that the standards of the time were inadequate. Years later, I had thyroid problems and had to have half of my thyroid surgically removed. I later became aware that thyroid problems are one of the first indications of radiation poisoning. On another subject, depleted uranium is used in the manufacture of armor-piercing artillery shells. Depleted uranium is a waste product of making nuclear bombs and waste from nuclear reactors. But it is still radioactive. Disposing of depleted uranium is a problem. Then, lo and behold, our government, the military, and the military-industrial complex discovered that depleted uranium is excellent for making armor-piercing artillery shells. It's heavier than lead and goes through armor much easier. These armor-piercing depleted uranium shells have been used in Iraq, Kuwait, and elsewhere. When they pierce armor like a tank, the shells explode, spreading radioactive dust over the area. Not surprisingly, our military and civilians in Iraq and elsewhere are suffering from radiation sickness and mutated children. Depleted uranium armor-piercing shells are still in use today. A little more background on my organizations. The National Association of Atomic Veterans used to allow membership only to those who had been directly exposed to nuclear bomb radiation. More recently, they have opened up to military personnel that have been exposed to depleted uranium. More information is, oh dear, it seems to be a mirror image. Anyway, it's at https://www.naav.com for more information or if you wish to join. Veterans for Peace is an international organization of about 3,000 members advocating peace, including the abolishment of nuclear weapons. Their website is at www.veteransforpeace.org. They can provide more information, or they would be happy if some of you wish to join. They also accept associate members who agree with our purpose and are not necessarily veterans. You note in the background the Veterans for Peace flag. It's flown at many events, especially anti-war events. Now, basically, thank you. Let's continue our efforts to ban nuclear weapons and depleted uranium weapons. Thank you again.
Harvey, thank you so much for your continued work and sharing your remarkable life experiences. Now it's my privilege to introduce to you Oregon PSR Advisory Board member Chisao Hata, a performing artist, community organizer, and global citizen artist. Her work shares the Japanese-American story to communities from Hiroshima, Japan to Cuba, and from New Mexico to Ontario, Oregon. As an arts educator, her perspectives are shared as an Oregon Humanities Conversation leader and Vanport Mosaic Festival Stories in Movement artist. Chisao.
Thank you so much, Kyle and PSR. I particularly want to thank Tricia and Harvey. Their stories, along with Yuki's presentation that follows, are stories of personal truth and lived history. These are essential tellings that put a face to the destruction and connect us to the ongoing impacts of nuclear proliferation. So here we are today, as Kyle said, virtually, living together during a time of challenges and opportunities, a time of confusion and reflection, a time for protest and action, a time to be together while we are apart. We are living during a historic moment. The Black Lives Matter movement has moved us. As peace activists, we should remember that it was Black people who stood up after the bombing of Hiroshima, and many others, they cheered when they heard about the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that they were vaporized in less than the time it takes for a heart to beat. But Black poet Langston Hughes, Black journalist George Schuler, and novelist and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston, and musicians Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington, and civil rights gay activist Bayard Rustin, and poet novelist James Baldwin, and W.E.B. Du Bois and playwright Lorraine Hansberry spoke up. They spoke up and spoke against the bombing as an act of inhumanity and moral depravity. Langston Hughes, who is known for his portrayals of Black life in America from the 1920s to the 1960s, who helped to shape and contribute to the Harlem Renaissance. As we question today, what is happening? What is happening in America? And we prepare to vote, let us all come together to the front of the line and create our America. Let America be America again, by Langston Hughes, language specific to its time of writing. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let it be that great, strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme, that any man be crushed by one above. Oh, it never was America to me. Oh, let my hand be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws the veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery scars. I am the red man driven from the land, and I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. I am the young man, full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men or take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed. I am the farmer, the bondsman to the soil. I am the worker sold to the machine. I am the Negro servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean, hungry, yet today, despite the dream, beaten, yet today. Oh, pioneers, I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years. Yet, I'm the one who dreamed our basic dream. In the old world, while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings in every brick and stone, in every furrow turned. That's made America the land it has become. Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home. For I'm the one who left Dark Island shore and Poland's plain and England's grassy lake. And torn from Black Africa's strand I came to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me, surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed and all the songs we've sung and all the hopes we've held and all the flags we've hung. The millions who have nothing for our pay, except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly names you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches in the people's lives, we must take back our land again. America, oh yes, I say it plain. America was never America to me. And yet, I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the wreck and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and the rot of graft and stealth and lies, we, the people, must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. It is often the immigrants or those who suffer injustices who can tell us what America is. They learn through paradox, and many people of color are in this state. I'd like to now introduce Yukio Kawano, who is a third-generation hibakusha from Hiroshima, Japan. And many of us have taken a journey with her through her creations and her powerful and artful performances that she has shared with us. Hiroshima is her heart, her body, and her work. Yukio and I finally worked together in 2018 after flip-flopping Hiroshima days for several years. And it was my honor to finally work with and get to know the woman and the artist. Yuki is an artist's artist who is constantly questioning and searching to understand her relationship with America. And today, we are extremely fortunate for Yuki to share her personal reflections with us. Yukio Kawano.
Thank you. Thank you, Chisao-san. I am so moved. Today is a difficult day for many of us. And to be honest, I want to hide in my basement and, feeling so vulnerable on this most emotional day. But here I am. My name is Kawano. I was born and raised in Hiroshima, a third generation hibakusha. A survivor of the US atomic bomb. I am going to read my statement today, and while I'm reading, I'm going to share my screen and share the images of my artwork. So bear with me. as I change my setting. Okay. Can you see it okay? Hope you can, it's working. I hope it's working. Okay. Thank you, Sean. Yeah. Okay. So August 6th came again this year, but this year's August 6th is different. We are in a specific time of human history as we are facing 158,000 deaths, which disproportionately claim African American, Latino, and Native American people's lives. My heart is wrenching, and I am asking questions. What does the nuclear issue mean to you? And how does it connect to your personal everyday life? Some of us are starting to recognize that the nuclear issue cannot be solved separately from the issue of racism. Today, I think of the trauma of Japanese Americans living through the history of their incarceration during the war. They tell me that because of their race, citizens and resident aliens of Japanese ancestry, the grave injustice was done to them. Over the years, I learned their journey of fighting against the racial power structure. One of their fights resulted in 1983, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians publishing Personal Justice Denied, stating that the government action had been based on race prejudice as opposed to legitimate security reasons. In June, the Japanese American community unanimously wrote a statement demanding that the Black Lives Matter and stating that the ongoing pattern of attacks and racial discrimination against the Black community must stop. And today I think of the trauma of the First Nations, how the Native American boarding schools uprooted their children from the land, and how that brutal act devastated the community for generations. I think of the communities continue living on exploited land in the COVID era, how their lives are endangered by the lack of safe running water. In New Mexico, I learned how radioactive land compromised the health of Navajo and Pueblo, and in Oregon, how Hanford contamination is affecting the tribes of Walla Walla, Umatilla, Yakima, and Wanapum, and they too are putting up Black Lives Matter signs in bold letters. This year's commemoration is different. After 158,000 deaths, I am asking, what does nuclear issue mean to you? And how does it connect to your personal everyday life? I am heartbroken and realizing that our issue of racism is the foundation of the suffering of people. As long as we keep the power structure that tolerate racism, we are keeping an impossible distance from solving our nuclear problems. Many people come to know Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the first victim of the atomic bomb. Some of us know that the uranium that was used for those bombs was from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the African miners who worked under unspeakable conditions are generationally exposed to radiation since 1921. The nuclear detonation and the Second World War offered America a position to claim its superpower and win the title of the greatest Now the country as a whole is dealing with its racist history within, and the oppressed are asking, when has America ever been great? This year's commemoration is different. It is different for me because I have to ask myself a question as a granddaughter of Japanese soldier who was deployed to China in 1937, the year of Nanjing massacre, and again in Malay Peninsula in 1942. Grandfather told me when I was 10 that he won't share his survivor story of August 6 because he said there is no point to tell, that I can never understand them. Japanese violent history forever silenced them. In his death, I started painting, creating, performing Hiroshima to have finally found a simple answer. On the ancient land of Pueblo, the voice of grandfather in me recognizes that I am in pain. 3 generations later, the act of racism in the war hurts my soul and threatens my body. This is this pain from which I acknowledge the racism in Japan and its aggression in Asia. I am filled with remorse and sorrow for so much agony and desolation caused by the war crimes of Japan and the government dismissing the claim of the victims, including those of comfort women. I regret that for 75 years, the commemoration was held without offering the long-awaited apology. I am deeply, deeply sorry. I will continue my apology and work on this issue, as I know this is where I can honestly start talking about abolishing nuclear weapons and its power structure. Today, August 6th, I urge you to join me to look directly into the face of the racial injustice. As long as we keep the powerful racial structure in us, the nuclear issue can never be solved. Please remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the new form of race massacre of the nuclear age. And remember, Black Lives Matter to all of us. Thank you. Back to you, Kyle.
Yukio, thank you so much for those powerful words. We're separated by computer screens here, but it feels as if we're sitting right there with you along with the other speakers we heard from today, and we can feel your emotion. So we thank you for that. We thank you all for joining us as well. I certainly hope this has been as educational and inspiring for you as it has been for me. If you'd like more information on what you can do to help and support this effort, visit the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility website at oregonpsr.org. You can sign up for action alerts and visit the Nuclear Weapons Resources page. Also, thanks to all of you for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate our speakers, our performers, and sponsoring organizations. Before we leave you, though, performing artist Anna Fritz will wrap things up with a song. It's a fairly simple song to follow along, so perhaps you could sing if you feel so inclined. Again, I thank you for being here. Please stay safe and healthy. Peace.
Take